Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hi. Nice to see your smile. Hey, Craig. Nice to see your smiling faces out here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Regulatory Authority's public consultation into offshore wind. This is the second public consultation that's been held thus far. Tomorrow night, we'll also be at the Willowbank Resort in the West End, and that again is from 6 till 8. So if you know anyone who couldn't attend tonight, please let them know. We'll be out there again tomorrow night. We are very excited to have you here. We want to be able to share with you the recent findings that the Regulatory Authority has gleaned. It's an opportunity for you as the public to hear about the latest findings and to voice your concerns or your congratulations, whatever it is you want to say. Tonight's the night. Also, please note that this is a public consultation, and that means that no decisions have been made. We just want to hear from you. This is a process. The public consultation actually ends on September 15th. So this is another effort, another opportunity for you to hear and comment. So, sorry, my manners. My name is Charmaine Burgess, and I am your moderator for this evening. We are going to be looking forward to some respectful dialogue on this topic, which can be sometimes controversial. Yeah, but as Bermudians, we will conduct ourselves with the proper decorum. Thank you for that. So just a few note-taking, housekeeping rules for you, just to let you know what the evening is going to be looking like for us. We'll hear from Nigel Burgess and Martin Georgiev, who will present the findings. At the end of that, we will have a Q&A. You can, if you have questions, come to mics on either side of the aisles and ask your questions, and that will be at the end of the presentation so that we can have a nice flow on this and not be interrupted. I'm going to try to have us end on time, which is 8 o'clock. I'm respectful of your time, and I'm hoping that we can get through it quite quickly. We have provided refreshments for you outside, so if you want to take a moment to go and grab some water or sandwiches or fruit or vegetables, they're out there for you to enjoy. And without further ado, I will open the evening with a few comments from the Regulatory Authority's Chief Executive, Mr. Abayomi Carmichael.
Good evening, everyone. The RA is pleased to welcome you to this evening's Offshore Wind Stakeholder Engagement event. We have some interesting information for you and equally look forward to your questions and comments. But first, some brief background on who we are and how we got here. Under law, the RA regulates Bermuda's electricity sector, and we're looking to foster competitiveness within it. As a regulator, we must balance all stakeholder interests and intervene only where positive outcomes in the sector would not otherwise occur. For electricity, it boils down to regulating two things: rates and service quality. In the very distant past, service quality was focused on a reliable supply. Will the lights come on when I hit the switch? But today, Bermuda's residents and businesses, very long accustomed to reliable supply, are increasingly asking a scope of questions which go beyond reliability into service quality. So today, consumers are increasingly asking, what's the carbon footprint of the generation source that is serving me? How much of my energy is locally sourced? What environmental, visual, health, social impacts are being incurred? How stable will my electricity rates be during a global economic crisis? How resilient is the supply during extreme weather conditions? And in what direction are all these measures headed? The RA and the electricity sector must find answers regarding the service quality and rates of the future. With these questions in mind, we are pleased to today present our initial findings regarding where we are and where we could be headed with offshore wind. So how do we get here? The Electricity Act requires an integrated resource plan, IRP, to be developed and periodically updated. It seeks the lowest cost or otherwise most appropriate plan to meet future electricity demand with acceptable risk and reliability. Each candidate technology's technical, environmental, economic, and social merits, plus the public interest and ministerial direction, are weighed into that equation. The IRP is a living document, periodically updated and reviewed. The 2019 IRP identified offshore wind as a potential candidate for bulk generation. And today, we take another step in determining its viability or not for Bermuda. So we emphasize throughout, as Charmaine mentioned, no decisions have been made. This is a public consultation process. So we're here today to present our findings and seek your feedback on the possibility of an offshore wind farm for Bermuda. So please, listen up, and when we open up the microphones, speak up. It's important that you have your say regarding what may be a key feature of Bermuda's long-term electricity rates and service quality. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention, something we don't take for granted. And I urge you again to register your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move forward with the rest of the presentation. I will give you a quick bio on the presenters. The first is Nigel Burgess. He's the head of regulation at the Regulatory Authority of Bermuda. He is responsible for managing the regulation department, which includes the financial regulation and technical units for the electricity, electronic communications, and submarine communications cables. Nigel is also responsible for ensuring effective regulation is developed and executed to fulfill the RA's legislative mandate as outlined in the Regulatory Authority Act 2011, the Electronic Communications Act 2011, Electricity Act 2016, and the Submarine Communications Cables Act 2020, the RA's work plan and the RA's strategic plan. As a chartered electrical engineer with specialization in power systems and control, Nigel has expertise in renewable energy. He obtained his North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners PV Installation Professional Board certification in 2014. He has led a wide range of strategic initiatives, including retail tariff reviews for 2021 to 23, the preparation of bulk generation procurement rules, feasibility studies for both wind and solar PV developments, and the launching of the region's first floating solar PV solicitation. Nigel, if you can just wave. That's Nigel. The next presenter is Mr. Martin Georgiev. Martin is a senior consultant with Ricardo. He has 5 years of experience in renewable energy storage and sustainable transport work. Martin has contributed to the successful delivery of multiple projects in the UK and internationally as a project manager and a technical expert. His experience includes a series of projects supporting the Regulatory Authority of Bermuda, including the delivery of an offshore wind scoping study and technical and financial analysis of solar PV. Additionally, Martin was part of multiple UK-based projects in the renewable energy space, focusing predominantly on solar PV, where he played a key role in carrying out financial assessments, technical analysis, and energy yield assessments. Martin holds a master's degree in sustainable energy systems from the University of Edinburgh, where his dissertation focused on offshore wind. And I'm going to turn it over to Nigel to kick off the presentation. Nigel?
Thank you, Charmaine. And thank you, Abiomi, for that introduction that saved me a few paragraphs. As Abiomi stated, we started this journey a few years ago. And today we are going to present to you our findings of the numerous studies that we have done over the past few years, and also ultimately a site selection and a range of challenges and benefits that we have identified as well with a potential development. And when I use the term development, I am referring to a potential development. So I just want to make that note and distinction. For today, we will have an introduction to how we arrived to where we are now. We have selected a site, a potential site, so we will detail how we determine that site and how we went through the shortlistings. We looked at numerous environmental considerations. We will detail those considerations. We have looked at the technical details for a potential development. And again, we will look through those. And again, the economics for a potential development is also detailed. Again, it is important to note that this is a development which is being just initially scoped by us. It is not a final development. It is just a proposed development at this time. So we do acknowledge that there's more work that could be done, and what we term de-risking activities. We will detail those de-risking activities in the seabed assessment and the wind measurement analysis. And finally, we will conclude with potential challenges and the benefits of a potential development. Again, the information that which we are presenting today is intended to be the facts as we have researched them and understand them to be. We are not looking to persuade on either side. It is just a presentation of the information.
Sorry, before we move ahead, we have slides, we have handouts actually for you to make notes against the slides. If you need the printout of the presentation slides actually are quite small, but if you can make notes on the side, on the right-hand side of your handout, that is the purpose of that. Also, for the full presentation is also located on the RA's website at www.ra.bm if you'd like to have a further and more in-depth look at your leisure. Sorry, go ahead.
Where we started in 2019, the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, established a plan for Bermuda for 85% renewable energy target by 2035. This included a combination of 21 megawatts of solar PV and 60 megawatts of offshore wind. For the offshore wind development, we have identified several main activities, which include pre-procurement activities, which are part of the studies which we are conducting now, a competitive procurement process, and post-procurement process, which is the construction and development stage. In our bulk generation rules, we lay out a clear and concise set of rules which we intend to follow for procurement of any type of generation. We plan to utilize a 3-stage approach for this development, and that includes an expression of interest, a qualification stage, and an invitation to tender. So we have conducted several activities already. And again, that's part of our presentation today, and what we term pre-feasibility studies, so pre-screening of sites. We also have engaged with the industry, also many relevant stakeholders, and we also have developed an environmental scoping study as well. We looked at various sites all around Bermuda, and we have identified a potential site for the development of an offshore wind farm. And as you see here, it is off the North Shore, about 9 kilometers off the oil docks or Fort St. Catherine. And as you see here, the red lines here coming back to shore are potential cable routes. And that is, we have an interconnection at a fairly central location in Tynes Bay. And some of the benefits of an offshore wind development, again, you're generating clean electricity. There's a global push to decarbonization. This would help you to get to that, help you to reduce those emissions. and also improves the air quality and around Bermuda. And most importantly, to customers, it helps to hedge the volatility of fuel prices. As you know, we all have our FAR that can go up and down quarterly or monthly. This will help to mitigate that volatility. So where we started back in 2021, we started with a set of pre-feasibility studies. And today, we are looking to engage stakeholders in the results of those studies. As I mentioned, those studies included environmental, previous pre-feasibility studies. Our next steps are to prepare solicitation documents and expression of interest. And as you will see as we get through the presentation, it is suggested that we continue on with a seabed and wind speed assessment following the assessment of the expression of interest and taking into consideration of public information. You'll see here that the operation is in 2029 with start of construction in 2028. So there's still a considerable amount of time before development starts, and there are numerous decision points along the way. When we look at the various sites around the island, we look to identify suitable sites around the island based on a suitability criteria. So we used a desktop-based study, and we also relied on publicly available information to identify various constraints that are currently present. We received information from and worked alongside the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program, otherwise known as BOP. When some of the factors we considered, again, was seabed characteristics, the environmental constraints, the infrastructure constraints, and also conflicting use issues for tourism or fishing, for example. I will hand it over to Martin to go through the actual details of the site shortlisting criteria.
Thanks, Nigel. And good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming along. So I suppose my role tonight would be to follow up after Nigel and provide a little bit more detail about the various sections and the various activities that were carried out. Starting with the site shortlisting criteria, as Nigel suggested, we have gone through a fairly thorough site selection process. We looked at numerous aspects of the potential impact of an offshore wind farm. They could be categorized as environmental, technical, socioeconomic, and so on. Examples include the seabed suitability, for example, from the technical perspective. Are we going to be able to install wind turbines at the proposed location? Protected areas, of course, things like coral, seagrass, impact on other marine species was looked at as well. We also looked at aviation constraints, how this will interfere with the operations of the airport, considering international aviation rules. There were other things, of course, like recreational zones, fishing zones, etc. We have taken those into consideration. To give you a bit of a flavor, what went into this research, we have included a couple of examples here. So the first one, the map to the left, shows the extensive coral cover on the Bermuda pedestal. You can see, for example, that there's quite a lot of coral cover on the outside of the pedestal, outside of the rim reef, and less cover within the lagoon. Other considerations were marine protected areas. You can see the map on the right, where we have seasonally protected zones. These are fish spawning grounds to the east and west of the island. Diving sites, of course, the coral preserve in green in the middle. The process that we went through was to collate all of those maps, constraints, and so on, and layer them on top of one another. And we came up with this as a result. We have mapped all the constraints that we could find in the different categories, infrastructure, environment, etc., plus the airport, and we created this map. And you can see that when we consider things like the environmental constraints in purple, various ones, topographical constraints, sort of complex terrain at the seabed, things like the rim reef, visual impact assessment, ferry routes, we have very little space on that map that is not impacted in one way or another by those constraints. After going through that process, we identified 3 sites. This was the initial pass, which we dubbed at the time 1, 2, and 3. So site 3 was immediately dismissed. It was originally conceived as a floating site because of the slightly deeper waters at Challenger Bank. And the other problem with it was the distance from shore, which means a longer export cable. And there's significantly deeper waters between Challenger Bank and the Bermuda Pedestal. So it makes for a much more technically complex installation. The second best site was site 1, but this was dismissed on the basis of visual impact. This was just 4 kilometers from shore, and that would have resulted in very visible turbines in the lagoon. So our initial assessment pointed towards site 2, and this was the one that was taken forward. Subsequently, site 1B was introduced. You can see that it is a bit further north from site 1. It's about 9 kilometers from shore. And subsequently, after we considered zoning restrictions in Bob's draft marine spatial plan, site 2 was actually dismissed, and after consultation with Zena, of course. After that discussion with Zena, site 1B was effectively the only one that was taken forward in our analysis. But there are some limitations, as with the other site, with site 1B, which mainly are reflected by the lack of specific information about the seabed, lack of surveys that have been carried out. So everything that we have analyzed about this site is desk-based. Some key challenges. There's a short section of the possible cable route that would enter the coral preserve. Now we have to be careful if that route is chosen. We have to be careful about navigating around potential coral in that area. The coral preserve is otherwise avoided, which unfortunately makes the cable length a bit longer. It has to go directly south before it turns southwest and reach Science Bay. The site is located within the 15-kilometer restriction zone of the airport, which means that any development cannot exceed 150 meters height. It's located 9 kilometers from shore, as I mentioned. The turbines will still be visible. We have provided some mock-ups that you can look at, but I'll bring them up to the screen as well. And the area is used for fishing, so there's going to be some impact on navigation where the proposed development is. So these are the visual impact assessments that we prepared. This is based on a concept design that we had with 130 something meter tall turbine, 130 meters, and 17 of those turbines located in the suggested site. So, sorry. This was taken from Ferry Point. It's one of the closest locations to the proposed wind farm. The second one was taken from Fort St. Catherine. It's probably closest to the back of the proposed development. And you get an idea of the approximate size of the turbines. And this is how they should look to the human eye, should the height of the proposed development, should the height be the same as the concept design. As I say, this is the scale, and it's meant to imitate the human eyes as accurately as possible. And this is from Admiralty House, which is a bit further away. With this one, we haven't placed all the turbines because they sort of fall one behind the other. But again, you can see that from that distance, they are not too visible. They are visible, but they don't stand out. They don't dominate the landscape in any way.
Just for the audience, there are, to scale on the sides of the room here, the same pictures that are being presented on the screen are the same ones here, so you can see a closer look at what the wind turbines will look like, and that is to scale, okay, for the various locations on either side of you. Sorry about that, Martin.
No worries at all. That's all I have on the site selection process. With that, I'm going to hand over back to Nigel.
Thank you, Martin. Again, I will excuse me. I will introduce the environmental considerations. So, as I mentioned earlier, we looked at numerous environmental considerations in excess of 15. Again, it was a desktop-based study, and we wanted to assess the potential impacts that this development would have. Again, when we look at the preferred sites, we do acknowledge that there are potential risks. When we look at the site of 1B, there's a coral reserve to the west, directly to the south. There are also topographical constraints, so there are challenges. However, we have offered ways to mitigate any of these potential impacts. And again, there are other environmental and social economic impacts were also explored. As we go to the next slide, Martin will go more into depth into the various constraints that we considered.
Thanks. Yeah, again, just to bring detail to the environmental scoping study work that was carried out for the offshore wind farm, we explored quite a few different topics when it comes to environmental impact assessment, 15 of them. And we used a range of information sources, some of them public, some of them based on previous work, some of them specialist reports that we obtained specifically for the purpose of the study. The impact scoring that we carried out looks at both construction and operation phases of the offshore wind farm because they differ quite a lot in terms of impact. And we used a simple red, amber, green assessment in terms of significant impacts, moderate impacts, and minor impacts. So in the next 3 slides, I will present the different topics, but I will not stop and dwell on them in any great detail. I invite you all to look at the presentation online, and there's a public report as well, which talks about these concerns in some detail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the different topics, talk a little bit about the scoring that we assigned, and pick up on a couple of them, just for the sake of time. So firstly, we looked at landscape and seascape, and we identified some red flags there. But we believe that after mitigation, both during construction and operation, this could be brought down to an acceptable level, to a moderate impact. The same applies to archaeology and cultural heritage, red to amber, in both construction and operation. With tourism and recreation, we again identified some impact, and while we do have some mitigation measures, we don't feel like this could be brought down to a minor impact. There will be some impact in terms of things that we discussed, like fishing zones, the wind farm, the potential wind farm, will be visible from various sites of interest, like dive sites, etc. There are going to be minor effects when it comes to aviation, for example, air quality, socio-economic, and human health. We don't anticipate anything major in those categories. Moving on, flora, fauna, wildlife sites. Again, we identified some red flags there, but we do believe that after mitigation, these could be brought down to an acceptable level, to moderate impacts. With marine water quality, there's a worry around the construction phase, but with best practice, this could be brought down to moderate. And during operation, there's no particular concern. Ornithology, we do acknowledge that there are some moderate impacts, but there are mitigation measures such as soft start procedures, for example, and avoiding peak nesting season for the construction phase that could bring down that impact. It's quite important to say that it's quite difficult to assess that at this level, and a full assessment will be carried out at full environmental impact stage once the detailed design is in place, if it ever comes to that stage. This includes assessing bird flight paths, migration paths, places where birds congregate. I don't know whether I'm using the right terminology, but I'm not an ornithologist. The point is that once the design is in place, this could be assessed in much more detail, and it will be assessed in much more detail. Again, some insignificant and moderate impacts when it comes to coastal processes, benthic ecology, and natural disasters. Moving on, last one of these, fish and shellfish, moderate impacts that could be brought down in some instances. Marine mammals, we identified some red flags when it comes to both construction and operation. So these come from noise and vibration from drilling, from pile driving when it comes to construction. And of course, there's the worry of habitat loss and destruction. There should be appropriate measures when it comes to marine mammals and turtles, and they would involve studying further the potential impact when it comes to detailed design, and also being prepared to pivot. If, for example, during construction it is found that pile driving is unacceptable, there might be the need to shift to a different type of foundation, gravity foundation, for example. And there are things like strategic turbine placements and devices to monitor mammal activity that could be employed to reduce impact. And then there's commercial and recreational fisheries. Again, moderate impacts that could be brought down by allowing fishing within the array, of course, with a safety zone in place. Fishery liaison officers that could mediate, agreed routes, and so on and so forth. So, in conclusion, we did go through a fairly thorough scoping study, but this was again a desk-based study. And once all the surveys are in place after detailed design, a full environmental impact assessment could be carried out. There are red flags that we identified, but we do believe at this stage that there are potential mitigation measures that could be put in place to reduce those. And the next step would be to execute the EIA, the environmental impact assessment, if and when a design is put in place. Now, we've talked about a lot of the negative environmental effects of an offshore wind farm. It's important to remember that there are positives as well. There is, of course, the reduction of carbon emissions and potential improvement in air quality due to the reduction in the use of the thermal engines. So that there is, of course, the positive side to this. We're going to move on to the technical details, and I'll let Nigel introduce that one as well.
Yeah, so when we looked at the makeup of a wind farm, an offshore wind farm, it is quite simple. Few main components. You have a wind turbine, you have an offshore substation, and an onshore substation, and you have cables that interconnect each of these. In our concept, again, we looked at 17 turbines, so there will be 17 array cables going into the offshore substation, and a single cable, export cable, is proposed to come back to onshore. Again, we have identified Times Bay in our concept design. So quite simplistic design, and and basic. There isn't many components to it. And as we get through further slides, that will actually translate into the development time as well. So again, I will hand it over to Martin to talk about the specifics of each component of the development.
Thanks, Nigel. Right, so as part of the pre-feasibility, we came up with a concept design. We selected a given turbine, foundations, and so on, which allowed us to come up with a high-level costing and to continue with the analysis. So here I'm going to walk you through the concept design that we came up with. Firstly, focusing on turbines, the three-bladed upwind design is an industry standard these days. So this is what we selected. It's quite important to note that these turbines will be operating in a hurricane-prone location, so they have to be of the appropriate class and designed to be able to withstand those winds. We opted for a relatively small capacity turbine. The idea here was mainly to provide flexibility. The Bermuda grid is not huge, and therefore opting for the largest possible turbines would a single turbine could potentially form a disproportionate amount of the generation capacity, and that creates sort of security of supply issues. For example, if 15 megawatts trip, that in a grid that could be as little as 30 megawatt demand in certain times, that would mean a blackout. So smaller turbines provide a little bit more flexibility, and that was the main reason for the selection. After we moved to Site 1B, there was another reason that became immediately apparent, which is the airport restriction zone. Having a height restriction of 150 meters means that probably you can't select a turbine that is much bigger than that. There are different designs, obviously, different turbines, and it's important to note that this is a concept design. But the selection will be limited by those constraints. So right now we have 17 of those turbines forming 61.2 megawatts. That's in line with the IRP. But we fully anticipate that this design will change should this development proceed to tender and an actual developer comes up with detailed design. Regardless of that, they will face the same limitations that we identified in the pre-feasibility study. So they may opt for 4 megawatt, 4.2 megawatt. There are turbines like that on the market, but it's doubtful that anything bigger would be going into Site 1B, which we identified. Moving on to foundations. We identified monopiles as probably the most suitable type of foundation for a potential development. So these are cylindrical structures that are driven into the seabed. They are suitable for sort of hard sediments, for example, and based on what we were able to find, we believe they might be suitable for the proposed site. They're suitable for the depth, and they impact a lower area on the seabed than alternative designs, and that again fed into the decision-making process. We do acknowledge that after thorough studies are carried out on the proposed site, the monopiles might not be viable after all. They might end up being unsuitable. So gravity foundations were identified as the second best option, where there is a large platform, concrete platform, which is dropped onto the seabed, and then there's a transition piece and a tower. And then finally, just a little bit on the electrical infrastructure. There's inter-array cables which connect each turbine with an offshore substation, and from the offshore substation, there's an export cable which runs to a point of connection to an onshore substation, a point of connection to the grid. These cables are typically trenched into the seabed, a couple of meters, for example, and they're laid and buried there. We identified Tynes Bay as a potential point of connection, and with the attempt to avoid the coral preserve that I already mentioned, the length of cables is around 17 kilometers. Now, again, going back to the point that this is a concept design, once we have a better understanding of the seabed, we might be able to navigate better with the cables, or a potential developer rather would be able to navigate better, and that distance could potentially be shortened somewhat. Something I will touch on is some intelligence that we were able to gather on developments in different geographies. We looked at Southeast Asia at this stage. The idea of focusing on Southeast Asia was similarity in weather conditions. There are hurricane or typhoon-prone locations there, such as Taiwan, and they are developing offshore wind. In Taiwan, they have a fairly significant pipeline right now, but we were able to obtain costs for about 4 gigawatts of that pipeline. Now, projects are ranging from as little as 10 megawatts to 4 gigawatts. They started off small with demonstrator projects, some of them 100 megawatts, which is very comparable to Bermuda. And now they're moving on to large-scale projects. The table on the right, you can see that about 12% of that 4 gigawatts that we could obtain costs for are in operation, and then we have 32% under construction. And the costs that we're seeing for the in operation under construction projects are very much comparable with what we are projecting for Bermuda. So this is somewhat a verification of sorts that these projects are possible at this price range that we are envisaging. Another example is Vietnam. Now Vietnam is much more interesting because they are managing to build projects that are very much comparable in terms of capacity to the Bermuda proposed development at a cost which is significantly lower. Now there are factors there. It's not a typhoon-prone location, so the equipment they use is probably more standard, less reinforced. There's less engineering going into it. And some of those projects, they're a little bit closer to shore, shallower waters, so they might be using different techniques for building those projects, and that might be driving the cost down. But you can see that it's about half of what Taiwan is spending per megawatt. Something interesting as a point is that the construction phase, which tends to be quite disruptive from an environmental point of view, tends to be quite short. Obviously, there is the preparation of the equipment and staging and mobilizing the vessels and so on, which takes time. But the installation itself is limited. to a very short period. Recent news came out that they managed to install a 15 megawatt turbine in 30 hours, and that indicates that potentially this could limit the disruption that construction would result in to a short period of time. And hopefully that will allow flexibility to construct outside of the most impactful seasons. With that, I'm going to stop with the technology review and hand over back to Nigel.
Thank you, Martin. The cost. So when we look at the cost and also the electricity generation, for the wind farm cost, we are primarily looking at the capital cost. So the actual cost of the equipment, the turbines, the foundations, the substations, the cables, development cost, the studies, and the permitting process, the licensing, and then the operating costs, again, the actual cost of operations, leasing costs, maintenance, insurance. We have estimated from in our concept design a range of $250 to $450 million. Again, it is a wide range. And what that says is that there is uncertainty, which we do acknowledge. There is more information that is needed to narrow down this range. For generation, using industry standard modeling software and publicly available wind data, and our concept design of 17 turbines at 3.6 megawatts, we was able to get about 180 gigawatt hours of electricity, which equates to about 30% of Bermuda's annual demand. So this equates to about a 30% capacity factor for wind turbines in Bermuda, and this is comparable for average wind speeds that we see in other locations around the world. So I will hand it back to Martin, and he will detail how we actually use the cost and the electricity generation, how we use those two parameters to assess the potential viability of projects.
Thank you. Just a quick point on the cost range. So midpoint of 350 million is roughly 6 million per megawatt. And Taiwan was coming up at 4.4 to 5.7. So somewhat comparable. And this sort of kind of leads us towards thinking that the midpoint might be well
Achievable.
Could be achievable. So moving on, I just want to touch on the levelized cost of electricity analysis that we did. So LCOE, as it is known, is quite a valuable metric. People use it to compare different energy projects, and it's quite useful because it could be used to compare different technologies as well. It focuses on the price of electricity, or the cost of electricity, I should say. Our analysis shows that the LCOE that we're looking at ranges from 17 to 32 cents per kilowatt hour, and the midpoint is about 23. We arrived at the range based on different sensitivities, so it's slightly skewed. The midpoint is slightly skewed towards the lower end, as you would notice. It is important to note that LCOE is not PPA, it's not power purchase agreement. This is not what Belco would pay a potential generator to offtake that electricity, because there are other factors that go into their calculations, like desired returns and so on and so forth. So that might seem a bit low, but a potential PPA would be different to that figure. We have carried out a bit of a comparison with different jurisdictions. We haven't carried out a comparison with different technologies as of yet, because this is something that is being undertaken as we speak as part of the IRP. But when we look at the LCOEs for offshore wind from different jurisdictions, we can see that the US and the UK hover around $100. So that's $100 per megawatt hour, or 10 cents per kilowatt hour, with Taiwan being a little bit lower at 85. And this is understandable. The factors that feed into that discrepancy between Bermuda's midpoint and other established markets is, first of all, scale. Bermuda's potential project is a much smaller project than the developments in some of those locations. Bermuda is hurricane prone, but at the same time it has a lower average wind speed. So while other jurisdictions would make up, like Taiwan, would make up for the higher cost because of increased generation, Bermuda has the problem of extreme weather combined with low average wind speeds. And there's, of course, the country context. It's a small island. It's relatively remote, and that incurs a premium. There's no way around it. With that, I'm going to hand back over to Nigel to introduce the de-risking activities.
So as you just saw, there was a quite wide range in the potential course of this development. So there is more information that is needed to narrow that range, and a couple of those activities, which we term de-risking activities. One is to help narrow that range, and that is the seabed assessment and a wind measurement campaign. And the other benefit to these de-risking activities is de-risking these activities to potential investors. We acknowledge that this is a small project on the world scale. It's unlikely to attract the mass interest of the large-scale developers, which will not be conducive to a competitive process. So the activities we are taking is to encourage interest from developers in hopes of having a purely competitive procurement process, and that we hope that will drive down the cost from the developers. As I mentioned, we have a good understanding of the implications of an offshore wind farm. As I mentioned, there are uncertainties that will impact the commercial attractiveness. So we feel that is necessary to continue on with these further activities. Again, the wind measurement campaign is a site-specific wind measurement campaign at the potential site for the development. Again, this will be an investment-grade wind study, which bankable wind study, which developers will be used to help determine their energy yields. Again, the other is a seabed assessment, and this is a site survey of the terrain at the development sites, and also along with the cable routing routes. And again, now I will hand it back to Martin to actually detail the aspects of the wind measurement campaign and the seabed assessment.
Thanks. So wind measurements, we have carried out an analysis right now, and we have some results, but this is based on publicly available information. There are resources that provide average wind speeds in different locations around the world, which are used for first-pass analysis. We have used that, and we have also used measured data to feed into some of the specifics of the wind regime, like profile, daily profile, and so on and so forth. And this led us to the 180 gigawatt hour figure that you saw earlier. But this is not investment grade, as Nigel suggested. To get a clearer understanding of the potential yield, a proper measurement campaign is needed, which is firstly looking at the wind speed in situ in the proposed location, and secondly measures at the height of the wind turbine or close to the height of the wind turbine for maximum accuracy. Also, the data that will be measured is very high resolution. It involves direction, speed, turbulence intensity, and so on. And that data would be made available to a potential developer who would be able to run a full feasibility, bankable feasibility study and assess the yield. On the seabed assessment, the seabed assessment is typically made up of a series of desktop studies, a geophysical assessment and a geotechnical assessment. The geophysical assessment is more of a scanning activity. There's things like mapping, sonar, drop-down videos, aerial photographs, and so on and so forth. Where the geotechnical is slightly more focused, looking at the exact locations where the turbines will be placed. There's borehole drilling, there's cone penetration testing, and activities like these. So after engaging with industry, we think that it would be best to carry out those activities up to and including the geophysical study. That would allow sufficient information to be gathered about the proposed site and provided to a potential developer without going into too much detail and spending unnecessary money to study in great detail before a detailed design is put in place. Once and if a potential developer comes along and there's a detailed design with detailed exact turbine placements, they can carry out the geotechnical study, knowing exactly where the turbines are going to go. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Nigel.
So our challenges and our benefits. So we do acknowledge that there are challenges to this development or to this potential development. Again, it is risky. However, that is why we are suggesting to de-risk the project. It can be expensive, again, up to 450 million. So again, we do acknowledge there are potential environmental risk, and again, we know this as much as the information that we currently have. However, we will continue to analyze and study these throughout the entire process. However, there are some benefits to developing an offshore wind farm. For one, it helps Bermuda on its pathway to decarbonization. It increases our self-reliance and our energy security. It diversifies our energy mix, which right now is primarily fossil fuel based. Again, it sets a precedence in the region, in the Atlantic, and in the Caribbean, even off the east coast of the U.S. Bermuda would be the first to have a functional wind farm site. Again, in the IRP, we established a target of 85% renewables by 2035, and wind was a major component of that. This will help us to reach that goal. Again, there are job opportunities here. During the construction phase, support from fishing and other vessels, for providing support to the site. Tourism has thrived in other areas with tour operators and even fishing boats converting to tour operations in sites around these developments. And again, there's also potential for Bermudians to be employed for maintenance and operation of these sites. Again, and most important to customers, it helps to mitigate the impacts of and our reliance on fossil fuels. As we know, we are quite susceptible to world events. The benefit of any new development generation, it will have a set price for the duration of their license. So it could be up to 30 to 40 years. We know the price of the electricity that we will be purchasing, which is not the case as we do now with the volatility of fuel prices. So when we look at our next steps, as I mentioned, now we are in our stakeholder engagement. The later part of this year, we hope to launch an expression of interest for an offshore wind development. Again, this will be the first stage of the procurement process. And our goal here is to, one, is to know that are there potential developers that are interested in Bermuda? And two, what is the potential price range that they may be looking for? That information will help us to assess whether we go forward to the next steps. Again, public interest is our primary concern. You are likely to make any decisions which will adversely impact customers. Following a favorable EOI stage, again, the procurement of the seabed assessment and the wind speed assessment, and looking to award a license, award win of a tender in 2026, and with start of construction in 2028, and then you can complete development in 2029. So there is there are several steps and decision points up until the start of construction, 2028. So we are by no means at a final decision. And again, this is our involvement, our context of involving the public and sharing the information which we have at this time. And again, so our next steps, in our view, the offshore wind farm has potential in Bermuda, and we should explore, should be further explored, as it does improve air quality, energy security, and helps us on a road to decarbonization. And again, we look to invite potential developers to submit expression of interest for the development of an offshore wind farm. And again, and also once the EOI responses are evaluated, we will look to procure a seabed assessment and wind measurement campaigns through a competitive process. That concludes the presentation part. Charmaine.
Thank you. Thank you, Nigel and Martin. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the presentation. There's a lot to digest, a lot of technical information, and I'm going to open up the question and answer period right now. But first of all, I have a question for you, gentlemen. Offshore wind, Bermuda would be the first in the Caribbean, you mentioned. If we decided that this is a possible solution for Bermuda, what happens if it's not a possible solution for Bermuda? What is plan B?
So that is evaluated in our integrated resource plan, which we are currently reevaluating. We are in the second phase the first phase of updating the initial IRP. Belka provides the proposal to the RA. We evaluate and go through an iterative process until a final plan is established by the regulatory authority. So again, that is not the role of this engagement. That is handled during the integrated resource planning process. That we are due to receive Belka's IRP proposal in mid-November, and it will be, as was the first IRP, it will be an extensive consultation process. There is the ability for alternative proposals to be submitted, and actually that is how we actually got to this path of wind, 60 megawatts of wind. It was actually from a local-based proposal to include 60 megawatts of offshore wind. So that went to our the RA's context of listening to Bermuda and their wants and needs. But again, ultimately, every plan or solution that we come up with, we look to ensure that the customer benefits that there's a stable and reliable source of electricity.
Okay. I mean, this week we're in hurricane season, where we thought we were going to get Hurricane Lee coming at us, and there's another one coming towards us next week. What would happen if we had those wind turbines in place? How would we benefit from them during a hurricane? or what impact would there be on those wind turbines, if any?
I guess so. Firstly, if you're questioning whether they would still be in place, it is very likely that they will still be in place. Any solution can be engineered. Again, as Martin showed, in the price range between Vietnam and Taiwan, one region which is hurricane prone, the other one which is not. There is a price difference. That price difference is because of its reliability, its functionality to deal with the stronger winds. So a solution can be engineered, and any developer which invests here puts a development here, but they want to ensure that their investment is going to stay in place, and with it not in place, they will not be able to make any returns. So I would be quite assured that they will provide a solution which will remain in place during hurricanes. And as in our concept design, there was a class 1 class 1 turbine which is proposed. Again, those are rated for category 5 gust of winds. So there's equipment there which can withstand up to category 5 hurricanes. But during a hurricane, actually, as a safety mechanism, most turbines do stop operating as a safety mechanism.
They stop operating, or do those little wings fly off? What happens?
Well, yeah, if I can jump in here. As Nigel said, it's a matter of design. There are classes of turbines that withstand that sort of wind. Through engagements, through conversations, we have found that there are other problems as well. There's actually the tower that needs to be reinforced. The foundations probably need to be engineered in such a way that they can withstand the thrust of a wind gust. So it will be a complex process, but it can be designed. And given what is known about the wind regime in Bermuda, the hurricane-prone location, and so on, this could be predicted, and then there could be a significant margin of safety on top of that. People are doing it in Taiwan, and only yesterday I was looking at a map of recent typhoons there, and they have been hit by Category 5 typhoons, and they have arrived at a solution that evidently still works after those typhoons. So it's just a matter of replicating that rigorous design in Bermuda if this is developed.
Okay, that's enough for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll open up the floor now to any questions you may have. And if you have any questions, you want to feel free to go to either one of the mics on either side of the aisle.
Sorry, Damien Wilson. The question I have is about the IRP process that's upcoming. Could all this be moot with one IRP submission from the utility?
The utility provides a proposal to the RA, as they did during the first iteration, and we evaluate that proposal, and we ultimately look to find the best solution for Bermuda. I can't determine what that solution may be, but we do evaluate all technologies, all available technologies that are available to Bermuda. So I guess in short, it could be if it is determined that that is not the right direction.
If I could clarify, the prior IRP, I was around for the other IRP submission, and the independent IRP was produced because of the fact that the utility was producing an IRP based on LNG. What if they submit an IRP based on LNG again? How does that balance with what we've just seen here?
So the RA starts the IRP process by issuing a guidance document. So we identify all the technologies which the utility should consider in the IRP. It comprises of again all available best technologies that we have evaluated that are available to Bermuda. It does include LNG, does include oil, fossil fuels, solar, wind, wave, LPG. So it includes all most commercially available technologies. Again, to get a full scope of what's best for Bermuda, we need to evaluate everything, and that's what is actually on the table.
I had other questions, but I don't want to hog the mic.
There's not a huge lineup right now, so you just go on ahead.
I don't want to be just like holding the thing.
Yeah.
The one other question I had was about the site selection. You only had 3 proposed sites, and you ruled out one for distance and depth of water, the other for view, which rankles me a little bit. And it gave us this one site. There's 2 questions from just that selection. One, your plan has 17 turbines erected there. What's the capacity of that site for expansion? That's the first question.
Okay. So we didn't look at one site, or look at 3 sites. Rather, we looked at literally every spot around in and around Bermuda. The constraints narrowed it down to those 3 sites, which then ultimately lead into one site. So literally everywhere around Bermuda was looked at. Again, so the site which is now identified as site 1B, it is 8 square kilometers, I believe. Again, the design ultimately is down to the developer. The IRP looks for 60 megawatts, so the development should be around 60 megawatts, which is the concept design that we have identified as 61.2. So if a developer is able to design something slightly more or less, that will be considered.
Right, but that's our one site essentially, in perpetuity. So if we get past 30 turbines, decide we like it, we like the concept, but we can't have any more, that would be it. We'd be maxed out.
Okay, I will start, and then I'll let you finish. I mean, you can place as many turbines there as you can fit. However, there are design considerations which you need to consider. When you take into this design considerations, spacing, turbulence, wind turbulence, and wake, you're ultimately left with quite a defined design. So, and again, the 70 turbines, I would say it optimizes the space along with the design considerations in being the 60 megawatts.
My last question is actually on the pricing. So there isn't a national grid. The grid is owned by the same utility that operates generation. So there's no open market. So it sets a price that it buys and sells. Can that pricing regime ruin this project before it even gets off the ground?
So there is one transmission, distribution, and retail licensee. So yeah, that is Belco. They do not set the price for offtake. That is set by PPA. In a development like this, it is a fully negotiable process or contract between the developer and the utility, where it is us involved. And again, it being a competitive process, the price will be evaluated during the procurement process. So what will likely come out at the end would be a very competitive price from the developer, and they will have a bit of constraints on their ability to negotiate at later stages. I can provide another example. If it was an unsolicited proposal, which is the ability for any developer to do, for example, for a solar project, they have the ability to fully negotiate the price with the utility. If that price provides an adverse impact to customers, that project will not be accepted. So any price which we accept, we will ensure that the customers, what the benefit of the customers are taking. We are unlikely to suggest a project which is going to increase the cost of electricity, again, in in consideration of other trade-offs.
Thank you.
Hi, Tony Nagel. Just sort of following on a little bit from that on the project economics. If we're talking sort of 350 million around spend, and we're going to have to borrow that money, someone's going to have to float a bond, something's going to happen to get that 350, 400 million. The bondholder wants 5% return minimum. It's a risky project, maybe they want more. We have to pay off that 350, 400 million over, I don't know, 20 years, whatever the life of the project is. So a return the project has to generate a return of, what's that, 35 million a year over that 20-year period, taking away inflation, forgetting about maintenance and things that are going to go wrong. So before we even get to the next phase, has Belco at least given some indication that we're willing to buy the electricity from the wind farm developer consortium project company in that amount of money? They made, the last time I could see, 20 million of earnings in 2019. Haven't found anything since then. Exactly. So if they're going to turn around and go, well, hell no, we ain't going to spend no 35 million on electricity coming in when we can produce it cheaper, does the whole project fall over, and do we stop today until we've got at least a high level? Yeah, that's about right, because we'll save 30% of our fuel costs and all the rest of it. Not questioning onshore wind at all, totally support that. This country's got a ridiculous carbon footprint and it has to come down some way. It's just, is this the right way?
Okay, so I'll answer your second part of the question first. So Belco is obligated to interconnect licensees, bulk generation licensees. They go through a process to determine they can be a licensee, and once they are determined, they must interconnect. And again, for them to have a license, there is an interconnection agreement in place. There is a power purchase agreement in place. So again, that provides the legal context for Belco being required to purchase any power from offtake and any power from any generator. There's a process to be a licensee, and again, that is a vetting process. And again, which I mentioned, we ensure that the public's interest is taken into consideration. On the first part of your question on the course, so this is not Bermuda government or the RA, or this is not you as in Bermuda building this project or investing in this project, although it could be. We're looking for established investors, developers to invest and develop this project. So it will be at no expense to Bermuda. It would be solely on the cost on the details of the developer.
Yeah, I understand that, but that developer is going to want a return.
Oh,
that,
understood.
That
yes.
return has got to be more than 35 million a year for that project to break even. So is that within a parameter that makes sense to Belco? Because they are literally the only people who are going to be able to purchase that electricity today.
So I wouldn't say whether it will make sense to Belco or not. It will be when the RA determined whether it makes sense for Bermuda. Okay. So it is not Belco's decision. It is the RA's decision to allow that potential developer to grant a license to produce electricity, to sell electricity at that agreed price. And like I said, the RA has final say on all, all developers on their interconnection agreements and their power purchase agreement. If their offtake price is too high, it's unlikely that development would go forward. And this will be determined prior to development. So so it wouldn't get to a developmental stage and then be naming a price. It is all determined prior to development.
Got it. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Misha Fubler. Got first question around energy storage. Will the proposals include requests for energy storage to mitigate the variability of the wind generation?
So this development does not include energy storage, although it developer can propose it. We have determined that energy storage is not required at this time. If there were large developments or even larger turbines being proposed, then you would likely have the need for battery storage. But at this time, it is not anticipated.
Thanks. And second question, what's the appetite for non-traditional turbine designs, vertical axis turbines, for example?
Sure. We did consider it briefly in our studies. There are no established designs at this stage which are being commercialized, or at least on any meaningful scale. There is a good reason why the three-bladed design, which is the upwind three-bladed design, has been established as the industry standard. I won't go into the technicalities about these things, but it offers a great balance, in essence, between relative simplicity and efficiency and effectiveness, in the simplest of terms, and that's why it's been so popular. So, in short, no. Very briefly, we did look into it, but then quickly dismissed it and moved on with the three-bladed design.
Cool. And last follow-up, in that space, is there appetite for partnering with non-industry scale, something that's not proven yet but offers great potential? Touching back to the vertical axis, there's a vendor that is in the pilot stage for combining the wind generation with kinetic energy storage. They hoist a weight off the ocean floor to drive the generation on demand.
Just to finish on the first point, sorry. What we put forward was a concept design.
Okay.
If a developer comes along and provides sufficient evidence that they have come up with a design with an alternative technology which will be reliable, effective, and long-lasting, I suppose that would be considered. This is not prescriptive, the concept design, in any way. This is just an initial study.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry, would you like to?
So additionally, for developing promising technologies or developing technologies, there is the ability for those potential developers to apply to be as an innovative, apply for an innovation license. Again, this is designed for promising technologies where Bermuda is essentially a test bed for those technologies to reach commercialization. So if that is their goal, I'll say that the innovation license will be their route. I'll say reach out to us, and then we can provide you more information on that.
Sure thing, thanks.
Good evening, I'm Gil Nolan speaking. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. It's well researched, and you've done a good job, I believe. Maintenance operations. You mentioned more studies required. Understand that. For something of these heights, and I'm realizing that smaller could be better from a durability standpoint. If you have 17 items, it's hard to break them all at once. But if you have a significant failure, what's the time to service, so to speak, if we don't have a resident jackup barge, jackup ship in Bermuda, which is expensive? It has to come from somewhere, and it has to be available, and that's a long way and high demand by other jurisdictions, I would expect.
Very good question. It's a very good question. There are strategies around maintenance. Some strategic parts could be kept in store if this is deemed necessary. But you're right, there can't be a resident jackup here. And if there's a major failure, that could be months of one turbine being offline. So, for example, changing a generator could be quite a significant undertaking. This could be exacerbated by weather conditions. So there has to be the suitable weather window to access the turbine. There should be the appropriate vessel to install the equipment, and the equipment should be in place and ready to be installed, of course. In short, there could be some arrangements put in place with maintenance providers. There could be a reserve of key spare parts kept in place. There could be a strategy, overall maintenance strategy that is developed. But in the case of a major failure of the turbine, it could be months.
So sounds like you pay for that reliability, you pay for that availability. It's for maintenance, for jackup, so to speak, if it's possible under contract.
It would be part and parcel of the OPEX, the operational expenditure.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. I have the second quick one, I hope. A few gentlemen mentioned storage, which is always in the news every day for everything. If you're not including storage in the request for bid at this time anyway, is that because of operational strategy to manage to just not keep them all spinning at once, or which we, if you had a lot of big ones, it'd be different. Is that why, or is it just too much to think about today?
So we have done stability studies on the network, and we have the results of that is that storage is not needed, is not critical at this stage for the performance of the network. When we look at, and again, that is with the smaller turbines. And again, as I mentioned, if you go to larger turbines or a larger development, then storage will definitely be part, or could be part of the conversation. But currently, under this current design, it is not critical to the performance or operation of the network.
So for wind, then, is that curtailment, or is it just not big enough to have the impact at 60 megawatts? 30%, 30% plus.
At this time, it does not adversely impact the operation of the grid. To where the additional storage or the stability devices are required.
Sorry, if I could jump in. Yeah. So I suppose one way to think about it is Bermuda has a lot of thermal generation. For better or for worse, it has lots of thermal generation. The worst bit, the bad bits, we've already discussed carbon footprint and so on. But the good bits about thermal generators is that you have a large rotating mass and you have inertia in the system. If something happens to a variable asset, it starts generating more, it starts generating less. The system couldn't shift as quickly to a different frequency, for example. Sorry, I'm getting a bit too technical here, but it couldn't deviate from the norm quickly enough because you have this large spinning mass. So it takes time, and during that time, the operation of the system could be adjusted. More fuel could be injected, less fuel could be injected in the engines. The thing balances. With 60 megawatts of wind and the thermal assets, we believe that no storage will be needed at this stage. If Bermuda had a different system, which is based mostly on wind and solar, some form of energy storage would be needed. But this is not the case right now.
Thank you.
Well, one thing I would like to see is, where is the frequency regulation going to be held? Is it at BELCO, or is it going to be at the developers? Because that's an important portion of electricity, keeping it at 60 hertz. We have two grids in the US, the Texas grid and then everybody else, and they actually have two slightly different frequencies that they allow. And I would like to have that, solidified who's going to be responsible for that, because then that determines, in a way, who's actually going to pay for it. If it's at BELCO, then we're going to pay for it forever. But if it's at the wind turbines, when they stop, then that cost goes away. Back to the operation side of things, there is a publication that actually does track where all these jack-up ships are and their schedules and whatnot. I didn't have the 1,500 euros to pay for it. Right? So that is another concern of mine, is that if half of these guys get taken out and it's going to take 6 months, what does that do to the pricing? Because we're used to 60 megawatts in, prices down here or whatever. And then for the next 6 months, we're burning more fuel. Is Belco then going to be allowed to just ramp up their prices? Or are we just going to have a fixed price so that even cheap wind or cheap anything is not going to be cheaper for us because we want to have that stability? If we follow the curve of wind going up and down, our bills will be going up and down. So is that going to be actually put in there? So
would you mind if we answer your first two questions first?
Yes.
Track? So on the first one, on the frequency regulation, so any bulk generation licensing, whether it's for solar, for wind, say even in Tynes Bay, they have an interconnection agreement with the utility. That interconnection agreement sets parameters in which where they must inject power to the grid. What they must inject the power to the grid at. So they must conform to those requirements at all times or face penalties, or even at worst disconnection from the grid. Again, so their solution is engineered for to meet those requirements. So it's ultimately on the TDNR licensing, Belco, to monitor and regulate their frequency. So that is totally on Belco to do, but they put onus on the suppliers to meet the obligations of their interconnection.
And what is Belco's frequency requirement?
It's 60. They operate at 60 hertz. I can't state the exact technical parameters. It is within a certain percentage, but again, that is totally at the negotiation, not so much negotiation, but in the contract stage between utility and the prospective developer. And again, it is not new. Again, we have Tynes Bay as a bulk generation licensee. We have Saturn Solar BDA that operates at the finger as another licensee. So it is, I'll say, quite normal, a part of normal operation to have multiple bulk generation licensees that will meet the technical requirements of the grid.
But shouldn't the frequency regulation actually be a part of the RA? Because then we're going to be in a point where if Belco don't like this guy over here, he could say, you have to give me 60 hertz, or I'm not going to interconnect you. But his Ace boy over here, you can do 59.5.
Sorry, just to bring some clarity to the frequency question. So the 60 hertz is a requirement, and the technical solution, the wind farm or whatever other generator they would be injecting at 60 hertz. The frequency deviates when there's a mismatch between supply and demand. If there's too much demand, the frequency starts to drop, and generation needs to ramp up to bring the frequency back into line. So, in a sense, that is with the transmission operator. They need to be operating the assets, and the flexible assets, which are the thermal generators, would ramp up and bring the frequency back into line. The technical solution from the wind farm would allow it to inject it at 60 hertz. If there's too much demand, those 60 hertz will drop. And the wind farm has no way of ramping up. It's the flexible assets that can do that. There are other solutions as well. For example, energy storage. This is becoming a big market in the UK. And in a grid like the UK, for example, you have a very complex set of services, and different assets can bid for them. Batteries are getting on that market, and you've got frequency response at 0.1 second, 0.5 second, 1 second, whatever. There's staggered services. And in the event of a deviation, they start getting online and responding to that event. I won't go on because I'm probably getting a bit too technical here, but the point is you have a solution which is designed to inject at 60 hertz, but the frequency deviates because of imbalances between supply and demand. And it's on the transmission operator to balance supply and demand.
But I won't monopolize everybody on stage.
I think that's why the question of storage has come up, because if we're switching to this other mix, then we're still going to need rotating mass. Without storage, we still need rotating mass.
Yeah.
It needs to be reference frequency.
Yeah, absolutely. But the inclusion of offshore wind into the mix does not exclude thermal generators. They will keep operating. And at this stage, the system is flexible enough that no investment is required in energy storage.
In order to turn off all the fossil fuel power generators, we will. I think that's
But that wouldn't be, that's unlikely to be a potential scenario. You'll always have a component of spinning generation.
Well, we're burning fossil fuel. We're going to keep getting these hurricanes, right? We're going to have to get off. Period.
Your question, please.
Hi, good evening. My name's Nikki Garrett, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm coming at this from another angle because I was just surprised that the Regulatory Authority of Bermuda is bringing this proposal to Bermuda. It's not BELCO, because I always thought BELCO was supposed to bring alternative energies or ideas. In my past life, I was head of building control, where you get permits when you build a house. And you always, if you're building a house, the regulatory thing is you have to build a tank to catch your own water. Now, the idea is, and I wonder if you could do this study, if everybody in Bermuda that had a house and they had 50 solar panels on it, what would be the reduction of energy that they would need to buy from BELCO? In other words, they become self-sustained. They don't have to worry about a wind farm. Wouldn't that be much better for all of Bermudians and Bermuda, that they are more self-sufficient like their tank water? And also in terms of a wind energy, I think it is great wind energy, but I'm just giving alternative ways of making Bermudians self-sustainable in their energy and not be reliant on BELCO and the high prices of electricity. And also in terms of building permits, when commercial buildings are built, as in England, well, you don't have to, but building wind turbines on the top, like you do chillers. Often there's chillers on the top of the building, or there's elevator huts on the top of the building. You have to say that every commercial property needs wind turbines on the top of the building. They're vertical turbines. They're very small. They're not big, and they rotate like this, and they can be around 6 feet high, and you can have a lot of them on a building. So wouldn't that be a better way, or you're a regulatory authority, of proposing that this be the way Bermuda goes, that every time you build a building or you have an addition, you have to have 50 solar panels on it, as you do a tank. And when you build a new commercial building, or you're going to renovate your commercial building, you have to put on the top of your building small little wind turbines that create energy. This way, you're giving Bermudians self-sustainability. And this isn't costing $450 million. Or if that's gonna cost $450 million or $35 million, give every house in Bermuda $20,000 to buy solar panels at no interest. Okay, that's all. It's just another way of looking at the idea of what you want to do. You want to make electricity low for Bermudians, don't you? For every household. This is a different way of looking at it, and it would be great if you could do a study on that. If you could do a study, as you've done a study on wind energy, a study on every house in Bermuda having 50 solar panels, and what would that do? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I can respond to that if you may. So firstly, it is not on the regulatory authority to propose solutions for residential, commercial houses, residences or buildings. However, we have identified in our integrated resource plan, in our IRP, what the upper limit for small scale solar developments are. Right now, I would say it's sort of an unlimited capacity or ability for residents and commercial buildings to install solar. Again, we set the upper limits. That limit has, I think it's at 30 megawatts at the moment, and I believe we're under 10. So there is the ability for, I think, significantly more residences and commercial buildings to install buildings solar on their homes. We just don't regulate that portion where we mandate it. But we provide the avenue for it to happen, which we believe we have doing, and opening up the capacity for residential households and commercial buildings. So that's the role that the RA plays in that, is setting that capacity, which is, a third prescribed at the moment. And again, that is reevaluated in the RP every 5 years. So that right now it's at 30 megawatts. It could go up to 60 or even 100 megawatts, which is Bermuda's total load, in subsequent IRPs.
If I could make a very quick point here. On your point about self-reliance, it's a great idea and it's a noble pursuit, but one thing that should be kept in mind is that Belco is there to provide a service which is constant. When everybody starts generating their own electricity, they would be buying less from Belco, but Belco would still be there to provide access to the grid and sell electricity when you can't generate your own electricity. So they would still provide that service, but they would sell much lower volume, which would make their business unsustainable. Yes, but there's
So what we have found is bulk generation projects, these larger scale projects, benefit all Bermudians, all residential and commercial customers, rather than, a single development at your home benefiting an individual customer. So we provide the avenue for those individual customers to have installations on the homes. But the work that we are primarily doing is to provide the benefit to the whole customer base, and that is the context of the bulk generation developments. A utility. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen Nagel. Again, great presentation. Really appreciate your time. My question is more about environmental assessments and specifically mitigation, and it may be something that you're unable to answer at this stage. But when I looked at the mitigation, it was more surveys, reducing noise. So going back to your Taiwan and Vietnamese examples, I'm not sure if there are any coral reefs around there, but obviously we have the coral reef is very important to Bermuda, northernmost coral reef in the Atlantic, and also quite unusual coral because we're so much cooler than other areas. Do you know of any wind installations over coral reefs, around coral reefs, and what they did to mitigate the damage that is? Because clearly there is a portion on your map where the coral is going to be affected. So how was that mitigated? Do you know?
I'm actually not sure whether there's any coral cover in the jurisdictions that we've looked at. The mitigation that we've put in place here is to select a site that doesn't have an extensive coral cover.
Yeah.
Looking at that site, if the turbines are placed appropriately, there shouldn't be any coral destruction, or it should be very minimized. But this will be answered at the full environmental impact assessment when the design is ready.
When you get to that stage, yeah, because obviously you're going to have big ships, and I don't know what kind of damage they can do as they're going across the coral reef. So I know that would be a big concern.
Absolutely,
people,
absolutely.
yeah.
It's a matter of selecting the turbine placements in such a way that there's no damage,
Right.
or
Okay.
it's minimized.
I know I've probably jumped the gun on that kind of information.
And the seabed assessment will help to determine where exactly you can and cannot,
Yeah,
or should
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
develop.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions at all? And if you do have any other questions on your way out, you think about them, there is a box on the table outside. So please feel free to write down your question and your email contact details, and RA will get back to you with a response. Yes.
Sorry, you mean Green Rock? Okay. Green Rock is a stakeholder that we have engaged with previously. So in short, yes, we have engaged with with Eugene, with most stakeholders, which people who we identify as stakeholders in this process. Yeah, we are aware of their work, and they are aware of ours as well. Yeah.
Sorry, gentleman in the back.
Yeah. With this wind generator and the transformers, how many wind generators per transformer? Because I feel that putting a transformer out in the ocean, subject to fire, subject to salt, corrosion, and everything, is that going to work? Right? In other words, is the whole farm on one transformer, or do we have two windmills, a transformer, then shore power? How does that work?
It's typically one platform, and I believe 17 turbines connected to one offshore platform. Yes. Well, there are measures to mitigate for that. You use the appropriate materials, and it has been done in so many locations across the world. It's probably not a significant worry. The equipment is available, and it can be done.
Again, that is up to the developer. Again, I am sure that they will take utmost caution in protecting their equipment and ensuring that they are able to produce electricity. If they're not able to produce, that they don't generate revenue, which will not be in their best interest. So I think we can be assured that any solution that goes in place, the developer intends for it to stay for the duration of their license, or the life of the equipment.
Any further questions? Okay, with no other questions, thank you so very much for coming out. We're all concerned about Bermuda. We all live on this rock together, and we all have the best interest of Bermuda. So thank you once again for attending our public consultation. We look forward to seeing you at future public consultations. God bless you. Good night.